So what can we do? And are there things we should be doing at the local level in our cities or counties or even at the state level? To tell us more about her experience advocating her city and state is Mary Coolidge. Ms. Coolidge is the Bird Safe and Lights Out campaign coordinator for Portland Audubon, an organization that works both locally and statewide protecting birds and their habitat. She is dedicated to making the built environment more hospitable to wildlife and helping connect people to nature. She splits her time between Portland Audubon and the Oregon Zoo's California Condor Breeding Facility and serves on the board of the Oregon chapter of the International Dark Sky Association, as well as the Bird Safe Buildings Alliance. Oftentimes, when people want to know what they can do to protect birds in their cities, Ms. Coolidge is the go-to person for advice. Welcome, Ms. Coolidge. Go ahead and turn on your camera and share your screen, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Annie and Shawnee and organizers, for having me here to be part of this panel with such an incredibly esteemed group of people. I have to say, I think everything I have learned about light pollution and window collisions, I've learned from the experts that have just wrapped up talking. So I'm here to talk about how we can use all of this information that we've just gotten from Dr. Barrentine, Dr. Longcore, Dr. Shepard, and use it to get people on board with changing the relationship that we have with light and being on board with a dark skies preservation campaign. So just to start out, a little bit of a roadmap of where I plan to go today. So I want to talk about who our natural allies are in this work, and in three basic categories, who we need to convince in order to influence change, because we know we're not going to do this work alone, right? So individuals and communities, professionals, and also policymakers. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we've done at Portland Audubon and at the Oregon chapter of the International Dark Sky campaign, Dark Sky chapter, in terms of grassroots campaigns, astrotourism, measuring sky quality in Oregon, the International Dark Sky Places program that's run by the International Dark Sky Association. I'm going to touch on that. I'm going to talk about the work that we have done engaging with graduate students, doing continuing ed for professionals working in the field, organizing symposia, and participating in those kinds of things. And then policy development. So kind of this long strategic game that we started with, hearing from Assemblymember Lee, talking about the work that they were trying to get done in California. So first of all, I think it will probably come as no real surprise to anyone, and certainly Dr. Barrentine touched on this. Historically, really the amount of time and effort that has gone into planning for daytime environments is much larger than the amount of time and effort that we've put into planning for the nighttime environment. Definitely a lot of the work that we do to plan for the daytime environment has benefits for nocturnal ecosystems. I mean, preserving anchor habitats in our urban areas, requiring eco roofs on some of our larger roofs, setting really ambitious tree canopy targets. All of these things have benefits in the nighttime environment. But if we aren't really thoughtfully designing and managing our lighting, we're actually doing quite a disservice to the nighttime environment and also to the nighttime experience for people that are going outside at night. Thankfully, I do think that things are changing. There's starting to be a real growing awareness about the importance of preserving the night sky. And there are programs that actually emphasize this. The Urban Bird Treaty program, which is run by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, is a program that emphasizes the protection of wildlife in our built environment, in our urban spaces. San Francisco is an urban bird treaty city, Portland, Seattle, all urban bird treaty cities. And I want to mention, maybe not incidentally, that the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation provides funding for urban bird treaty cities and to do the work that they're doing. And NIFWF has really funded probably the better part of the last 8 years of the work that I've been doing in Portland on dark sky preservation and collisions management. So something to look into if you're looking for funding for doing some of this work and you're also an urban bird treaty city. The Biophilic Cities program also promotes the protection of wildlife in our cities and our built environment. Portland's a biophilic city. San Francisco is also a biophilic city. So another way that we're getting support for doing this kind of work. And then increasingly, we're starting to see dark sky tourism, and Travel Oregon and Travel Southern Oregon, both in Oregon, have produced a lot of information about dark sky protection. There's even a toolkit, and in some cases, this is linked to funding opportunities. So something to consider in your neck of the woods as well. Okay, so relationship building is obviously really important in any campaign. And so I think we really need to start thinking about who our allies are in this work and who we can reach in terms of a broader audience if we have a more diverse group of stakeholders. Having a diverse group of stakeholders also increases the entry points that people can use to get exposed to this kind of work and then hopefully get hooked. So this is just a short list of ideas about who we have built relationships with in our work in Portland and in Oregon. You really want to get creative. So of course, we're talking about astronomy groups, and not least of all of which is high school astronomy clubs. So young people are incredibly energetic. They're often very optimistic, and they're eager to participate in this kind of work. So don't forget about the high school astronomy clubs. Other wildlife conservation organizations, whether they are focused on invertebrate preservation or whether it's something like the Wetlands Conservancy, think about who else you can hook up with in this work. Neighborhood associations, I hear from a lot of people that have light trespass from a neighbor's light into their home. So I think that neighborhood associations are great places to go and do presentations and talk about the importance of managing our lighting better. Tourism organizations that I just mentioned, university professors, absolutely critical partners in this kind of work, whether they are teaching ecology or urban ecology or architecture or landscape architecture, all of them can be great partners in advancing this work. Doing continuing ed with architects and lighting designers and planners, and even just finding professionals in the field that are that have a proclivity to some of this work, they can be excellent partners. Sleep doctors that can speak to the issue of circadian rhythm impacts from light pollution. Parks managers, whether it's at the state, city, or county level, even the national park level. In many cases, these folks are either making lighting decisions or they are managing existing lighting systems. So great to have them as partners, master gardener organizations, and then things like festival organizers, science pub organizers, folks at local theaters, folks that are putting together eco-film festivals. Those are all great partners because they create opportunities to reach the public in ways that you might not otherwise reach the public just through your conservation organization. So I think those have been really important in terms of bringing, for example, Harun Mehmedinovich to Portland a number of years ago to present on his Skyglow project at a local theater. I have given talks at the Portland Winter Light Festival, which is all about lighting it up. And I'm not there to rain on anybody's parade, but just to start to introduce some thinking about light we need versus light we don't need and how we design it well. I mentioned wetland-focused organizations. So we have partnered up with the Wetlands Conservancy to produce a flyer jointly and get the word out to their constituents as well. So things like that are something to think about when you're building relationships, really thinking outside the box. Engaging communities is actually the way that we start to build a conservation constituency. A lot of change happens at the individual level and in people's homes, and then people influence each other. So they're influencing their family members, their friends, their neighbors. And these are also the grassroots activists that we are going to call upon later when we are trying to push legislative change. So it's really important that we are engaging the community. Birds have been mentioned a bunch of times today. Luckily, these days we have researchers who are using radar technology to track the movements of birds that are on migration and share lights out alerts that they are generating. So the plight of long distance migrants is actually one of the most captivating narratives for people that I have found. And even in talking with other folks outside of the bird conservation world, people just can't get over the fact that birds are migrating at night in huge numbers and that light pollution is affecting them. So this has been an incredibly effective campaign. There are a lot of different entry points that people are going to engage with light pollution work, but this one is incredibly successful. Some of our social media posts about this kind of stuff have generated something like nearly 100,000 contacts. So this is a massive way that we're getting the word out. Dr. Shepard mentioned this in part. About 80% of our North American migrants actually migrate at night. And Colorado State University's Aero Eco Lab and Cornell University are folks at both of those locations are tracking bird movements, and they are studying climatic patterns, so wind and precipitation, atmospheric pressure, and they are generating forecasts. They're learning to predict really big nights in bird movements. So this is an example from May 4th, 2022 for Oregon. And we had a prediction of nearly 5 million birds that would be moving over Oregon that night, which generated a red alert for the western and eastern portions of the state, an orange alert for the central part of the state. And we got the word out to our networks, also broadcasting this through the Oregon Audubon chapter network statewide to get the word out to cities throughout Oregon. What we found the next morning when we checked the migration dashboard out of Cornell was that over 25 million birds had passed through Oregon the night before. So this was a huge night to get people thinking about turning off their lights. And really importantly, we are asking people to turn their lights off on these critical nights, but we are also messaging that what we want people to do is consider whether some of the behavior changes they engage in on these particular nights are things that they can continue to engage in year-round. This is also a little bit of a warm-up for cities that are participating in seasonal lights out programs to adopt lights out policies more permanently. So this can be a great inroad, a kind of pilot that they can see. Does crime increase? Are people complaining about it? Does this generate a lot of public support? And they can kind of get their arms around it before they adopt more permanent policies around something like this. Not incidentally, we are also asking local buildings to participate in these lights out alerts. So we are engaging both with residential folks and also building owners and managers and even policymakers at the local government level. So in the vein of asking people to change their lighting behaviors year-round, in 2017, we launched a Take a Pledge to Go Lights Out program where we ask people to look around at their home lighting, see where they can apply best practices in lighting to their own home lights, turn off lights, especially during migration season, think about turning them off beyond that. We send them a yard sign that they can hang in their front yards to help raise awareness about this issue. We also ask them to email the mayor and city council to tell them that they've enrolled in this program. And then we ask them to get on our activist list, because not at all incidentally, what we really want to do is be building this grassroots activist network. So folks that are enrolled in our program are folks that we will call upon when we're trying to push for policy change, both locally and statewide. And some of this is direct outreach to get folks to enroll in this program. A lot of our folks come through the Backyard Habitat Certification Program. So this is a program at Portland Audubon where we ask people to plant natives in their backyard to be good stewards for wildlife. And then The other piece of that is that we're asking people to manage hazards at home. So that's keeping your cats inside, managing windows so that you reduce collisions, and also managing your own home lighting. So astrotourism is a hugely growing industry. More and more people are traveling to see the stars. I think this especially started to happen when people were traveling relatively locally during the pandemic. But there's a ton of potential here to cultivate new activists. So there are also very real economic benefits for rural communities that might not otherwise have a huge influx of tourists. So in Oregon, both Travel Oregon and Travel Southern Oregon are promoting this, and both state and national parks are increasingly recognizing that the night sky is a resource that they can offer people that are visiting their parks and help people reconnect with the night sky. The other thing is that even if what we are really focused on doing, and I think that Dr. Barrentine makes a really good point about much of our light pollution being originating in our urban areas, even if our goal is to curtail that light pollution in cities, having places that people can go relatively nearby and get enchanted by the night sky helps build their relationship with this conservation ethic and wanting to preserve dark skies, so that when they go back home, they recognize what they're missing and they care about it. So I think it's really important that we're thinking about preserving our night skies across the scale of urban landscapes to rural landscapes. Another way that we're engaging people is through the Oregon Sky Glow Measurement Network. This is a program of the Oregon chapter of the International Dark Sky Association. So what we have is a network of sky quality meters. That's what this little guy is here up in the right-hand corner. It's battery operated. We have 39 of these deployed around the state of Oregon in both urban and rural areas. And what these units do is they take a snapshot of the night sky every 5 minutes all night long. And then whoever's hosting that unit downloads the data every 3 months. That gets rolled up into a report, and it helps us track changes in the quality of our night skies statewide over time. In some places, these units are deployed at locations where the land manager is hoping to pursue International Dark Sky Place designation, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. In other places, it's just because folks are interested in helping collect data about this issue. At present, we have 17 more of these sky quality meters that are in discussion. And here's a map of where they are currently deployed. So all of the stars on this map show current locations of sky quality meters. The circles on this map are locations in discussion. So you can see there's a cluster of them here on the south coast of Oregon. There's another cluster up here in the Columbia Gorge. We have a fair number of sky quality meters in urban areas. In Portland, one of them is in my backyard, down in the Eugene area, in central Oregon around Bend, and then we have some distributed out in much darker sky locations around the state. The locations circled on this map in red are already International Dark Sky Places, and we're going to talk about that as well. So in terms of engaging professionals, this is a really critical piece. I think we need to be talking to professionals in the field and broadening their thinking about light pollution, because these are really important change makers. So International Dark Sky Places program, this is run by the International Dark Sky Association. Hopefully folks have heard about this. This is really kind of a combination of both professional and community engagement. So International Dark Sky Places are not just places that have incredibly dark skies. There's actually a range of parks, reserves, and sanctuaries that are relatively dark places. Also International Dark Sky communities, where residents of towns have gotten together and decided that they are interested in protecting the skies overhead, and so they seek a designation. And then there's also an urban night sky place designation. This is more primarily focused on outreach and education and teaching people about good lighting choices, best practices. And so The International Dark Sky Association helps support the pursuit of IDSP designation in places like state parks and even county parks. We provide a fair bit of technical assistance, so evaluating the quality of the night sky, taking night sky photographs, things like that. And then Portland Audubon is really engaged in helping the city of Portland in a slow process of designating one of their parks in Northwest Portland. So what we have done is we partnered with the city of Portland and also with Rose City astronomers to hold star parties, family-friendly star parties at this park, where folks come out, they can take an owl walk, they can take a bat walk, they can look at specimens of nocturnal creatures and also diurnal birds that are migrating at night. They can dissect owl pellets. And then we have a big star party where we're looking at constellations. And this is in service of eventually getting International Dark Sky Place designation at Washington Park. This is a map of international dark sky places across the nation. And I think it really illustrates the national reach. I realize this is probably a little bit hard for some people to see depending on how big your computer screen is. But all of the dots on this map represent either designated sites or sites that are in an application process. And right now, well, as of October, there were about 131 existing designations and 73 applications in the pipeline with the International Dark Sky Association. Interestingly, about 15 of those are in urban locations, and about 60 of those represent communities that are interested in protecting their own night skies. Okay, so another way that we're engaging professionals is providing continuing education for architects and landscape architects. This helps raise awareness for them about issues that they may encounter as they're doing projects. It starts to build buy-in from them. And this is really invaluable because if you have professionals pushing back against you when you're working on policy creation or even voluntary programs, that's going to make it so much harder to affect change. So getting out there, providing continuing education for the professionals, getting them on board, this is hugely important. Another thing that we do is we work with local schools. So the Portland State University School of Architecture program, also the University of Oregon School of Architecture program. We're going into classrooms. We're helping the educators talk to students about real issues that are happening out on the landscape. And we are starting to, let's say, indoctrinate the next generation of professionals with some of this thinking. We're really starting to shift the paradigms about glassy buildings and about how we design our lighting so that these students that are soon to be professionals in the field have some facility with it and are really already bought in. Also, organizing and participating in forums and symposia is a great way to educate our colleagues and other professionals. So here in Portland, we have something called the Urban Ecology Research Consortium that happens annually. Dr. Longcore has been up to give a keynote talk at one of those YERC events, and we've presented there on collisions and light pollution. A few years ago, the International Urban Wildlife Conference was in Portland, and I put together a panel. Dr. Chris Shepard was in attendance at that to talk about collisions. So these are all really important ways that we can engage professionals. I'll also mention that in 2012, we developed a resource guide for bird-friendly building design. This was based on a template that Dr. Shepard created at American Bird Conservancy. We created a process for customizing that for the city of Portland, and we brought together a really large team of professionals, architects, landscape designers, planners, glass manufacturers, to sit in on this process of customizing this document because we really wanted to raise awareness and start to develop some local buy-in. Okay, and now we get to policy development, which brings us back to the opening from Assembly Member Lee and thinking about what we can do in the policy arena. So folks probably have had some experience with this and know that policy development is really a long game. we rarely get what we want on the first push. So you got to have stamina for incremental process, because that's often the way that we're affecting change. It gets incredibly easier as others get out in front of us and change the status quo. But when we're on the leading edge of this, it really takes a lot of time and a lot of runs at this kind of thing. So this is just a brief timeline to illustrate the work that we've been doing in Portland since about 2009. We've made a lot of progress in the last 13 years, but there is still a ton of work to do. I have a strong feeling that I will retire from my job and that there will still be a lot of work left to do, which is great in terms of job security, I guess, for the next person. But I'll just walk you through this really briefly. In 2009, we started window collision surveys in Portland, recognized that we had a problem that we needed to start thinking about solutions to. In 2012, we released this resource guide for bird-friendly building design that I already mentioned. And actually, if we do an update to this, I'm planning on changing the name to bird-friendly building and lighting design, because really that is a critical component of this document. That really set the stage for, in 2015, getting the city to incorporate bird-friendly building and lighting design into their own green building policy, which meant that all City of Portland projects had to be built to these requirements. And then that further set the stage for, in 2018, integration of bird safe exterior glazing code into our central city plan, which made it a requirement for all buildings in the central city. That was later expanded to the South Reach, so more parts of the city that have this requirement as well. From 2018 to 2022, we worked on this dark skies report and recommendations, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in depth on the next slide. So I'm going to jump ahead to here we are in 2022. And we are currently working with the city to develop now a standalone dark skies appendix in the green building policy to expand on the existing standards that the city has to comply with. Metro, which is a regional layer of government in our area, has just, as of October, adopted bird-friendly building and lighting design as part of their green building policy. And back in 2020, we took a run at an Oregon State dark skies bill. It started out as a fairly comprehensive bill that actually Dr. Barrentine helped with significantly. Ultimately, it was such a packed legislative session, we rolled it back to a study bill, and unfortunately it died without a hearing. But here we are at 2022, and we are taking another run at a state dark skies bill. I can tell you we had our eyes very closely on the bill that Assemblymember Lee had brought forward, and we were really hoping that Governor Newsom was going to sign that into law, and that was going to grease the skids for our efforts up north, up here. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. So we are all, still in this incremental progress phase. Okay, so now I'm just going to, in this case study, get back to grassroots activism, helping push for policy development. So back in 2017, I mentioned that we launched this Take the Pledge to Go Lights Out campaign. In 2018, folks that had enrolled in that program and had elected to be on our activist list, as well as other activists, helped push for funding for a dark skies initiative in the city of Portland, and we got the mayor to fund that effort. We then spent the next 2 years working with the city on a report. This was essentially a white paper on the state of light pollution around the world, and then specifically in Portland. And it was a 43-page document that included 15 recommendations for reducing light pollution in Portland. We published that in 2020. It was adopted by City Council. Everybody knows what was going on in 2020. It essentially started gathering dust on a shelf because there was no funding made available to start to implement some of the recommendations. Now, fast forward to 2022, and our grassroots activists have helped us put pressure on City Council for actually funding implementation of this report, chiefly development of city code that looks at best practices in lighting design and what we can do to bring our city up to speed here. So This is kind of how we bring it all around. The folks that we have engaged on the individual and community level, in some cases even on the professional level, help us affect policy advancements. And now I'm just going to leave us with a few inspiring images that are hopefully some food for thought. I think that it is absolutely possible for us to have vibrant spaces outside at night in our urban areas that are appealing, that have really nice layered light that's warm, creating spaces that are inviting where people feel safe and that are not creating a lot of light pollution. So these are just a couple of photos up top from Prairie Line in Tacoma, which is a city to the north of us here in Washington, where they've done some pretty interesting lighting that's relatively low intensity, but also creating a vibrant space where people can hang out. And then Herman Lake Park in Houston, the two photos on the bottom left here that are creating really just gorgeous places to spend time. And this is in a highly urbanized environment. And then Vancouver, BC, some really interesting lighting that has been installed there as well. And a few more photos. So along the top, this is all the Highline Trail in Chelsea, New York. I think pretty much all of the lighting along this trail is relatively ambient lighting where you're not looking directly at light sources. That again is creating a really beautiful space for people to occupy. And I think if they can do that in New York City, we can really do this anywhere, right? A couple of examples, sorry about that, on the bottom. So the lower left photo here is a building called the Fairhair Dumbbell in Portland. Not too terribly glassy. It incorporates public art. And unfortunately, just before this building opened, they went in and they installed this very high intensity LED lighting on the tops of all of the awnings above the entries to this building. And so that those light sources start here and they point directly up into the sky. Really unfortunate the way they decided to light this building. And then on the right here, we have more public art in the city of Portland in Southeast, where the artist has elected to illuminate his painting from the top down. So a much better lighting scheme here than we see here. And I'm going to leave it at that. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. Thank you all for your time and interest.
Thank you so much, Ms. Coolidge. It was very helpful to hear about how the Portland metro area and the state are protecting birds and whole ecosystems by curbing light pollution. And it was especially helpful to hear all the different groups you partnered with. This can really serve as an example for our own municipalities looking to make a difference in protecting our dark skies. And I appreciate you saying that policy is really the long game. So we here in California will keep trying.